Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I just realized I might be on the wrong sound input, so I'm going to change that straight away so that you guys can hear me a bit better. So let's fix that. There we go. So you should be able to hear me a bit better now. So thanks for joining this live stream going out to Facebook and YouTube. And today we're editing a portrait from a photographer from our community who shared one of his shots recently over on Instagram. That's Tatan Zuleta. Sorry if I've said your name wrong, Tatan, but hopefully that's fairly close. So if you've been absent off our Facebook and Instagram, we've been sharing a number of portraits and self-portraits over the past couple of weeks. We particularly like Tatan's shots and asked if he wouldn't mind, let's just bring them up on screen, asked if he wouldn't mind us actually editing one of them, and he said yes, which was great. So he had this one and then he also had this one, but we're going to have a go at Jeffrey today as well, who's got a fantastic look. Pretty good out of camera, doesn't need a great deal of editing, but just a few little things that we can do to finalize the edit. I've also got Tatan's here as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to do quite as nice job as he did, but that's his final edit, so I'll see what I can do with my skills. Any questions you've got as we come along, please feel free to put them in the chat over on YouTube and Facebook as well. So let's get started. Right, first of all, I'm going to put in a crop. So C for crop on my keyboard, and let's just squeeze it in a little bit so it's a bit more focused on his wonderful features. There we go. So that's a pretty good start. I might adjust that later on. Let's also hide the browser so we've got a bit more editing space as well. So first of all, as I said, it's pretty good out of camera, but I might like to brighten the face a little bit more. Now it's nice to have the dark shadows in the background, so I'm probably going to avoid using exposure because that's going to lighten up the shadows as well, and they're kind of at a nice density. If I hover my cursor over here, they're kind of a near black, so if I use exposure it's going to brighten those as well. But if we use brightness, that's going to affect just kind of mostly the mid-tones, and it will have less effect on the black. So you see, if you look at my RGB values, it's barely changed, but it's brightened his face quite a fair bit. So I might push that a little bit more. What we can do, of course, if we want to richen our blacks a bit more, I can just drop the black slider down a little bit as well. So that's a good start. So the next thing that I think I would like to do is deal with a couple of separate things. So his hand's a bit on the bright side, so I might like to tone that down slightly, and we can use the skin tone tool just to normalize the skin color a little bit as well. So if we zoom into 100%, like all of us, we always have variations in skin tone. The nice thing is we have in our color editor, we have the skin tone tool, which does a great job of picking, if you like, a target skin tone and then normalizing everything else to that. Now it's good if we can do that on a layer, because sometimes when we're using the skin tone tool, it can affect parts of the shot that we don't want it to affect. So let's just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to start by making a new field adjustment layer, and we're going to name this skin tone, like so. And the reason why it's filled, so if I press M on my keyboard, you can see that the whole layer is now red because it's a field adjustment layer. So that means whatever I'm going to do now is going to affect the whole image. Now you might feel that's a bit strange because I said we don't want it to affect the whole image, but the point of starting like this is that it can allow me to see my adjustments, dial in the settings, and then we can decide exactly where we want those adjustments to be. So back over to the skin tone tool. I'm going to grab the picker and we're going to look around our subject Jeffrey and decide what our target skin tone is. So I'm going to go sort of somewhere around here. I don't want to go up here because it's getting a bit too sort of red and so on. I want to go somewhere here where it's a bit more even. So I'm going to go for that. Now straight away we get a target color range over on our color editor. Now that's just a suggestion, and we've got a small dot in the middle. That was the picked color. That was the exact color tone, if you like, the target that I picked. So what really we want to do, we want to gather all the skin tones in Jeffrey's face and then normalize them to our target. Now, because I want to gather everything, I'm going to expand out this range a bit more to potentially cover everything. Now, if we scroll down in the tool a bit, under the uniformity, we've got 3 sliders here, which essentially will do what I just said. Everything in this color range, sorry you can't quite see everything, will be normalized to that pick color as I drag these sliders across. So as I drag hue across, probably a good telltale sign is the lips. So if you see, as I drag hue across, his lips actually change to that target color. Now that's kind of, if you like, an intended consequence or a undesirable consequence, if you like. But what we're doing now is just setting a good range. So as I bring saturation up, that's going to normalize the saturation, and lightness, you see, that's going to kind of ruin all Tatan's nice lighting. So we're not going to touch that too much. So that's given me good settings for those sliders. Now what I want to do now is just apply that where I feel best. Now you've got a couple of choices here. You can either just erase where you don't want the adjustment, or you can brush it in where you do want it, because you'll see if I turn this layer off, notice how it's changing his hair color and kind of over the whole shot. So it's too much, you know. So if I right click and say clear mask, that's going to get rid of my mask, but it's going to keep my adjustments intact. So now I'm free to brush them wherever I like. So let's go back in, grab a brush, and then now, tell you what, it's a bit close, right click, make my brush a bit smaller. I want to keep it nice and soft. And what we want to do is bring the flow down, and this will allow me to build up the adjustment slowly. So if it kind of needs a bit more treatment in one area, I can brush more. If it doesn't need much treatment, then I can brush less. So it's just really however much I brush, it will gradually build up my adjustment. Okay, so probably make this a bit bigger. I'm just going to do a few sort of sweeps just around here under his eye, just on his nose. Now it's going to be quite subtle, but when I turn the layer on and off, you'll see just the color tone shift a little bit. Now this can be quite a handy technique, especially across different body parts as well, for want of a better expression. So often your hand is a different color tone. Mine's actually not too bad, but if you're cold, often the color will drain from your hands. So if you can see any hands in the shots as well, then that can kind of have a negative impact on a nice even skin tone as well. So we just brush over here, not being particularly super accurate about it, but avoiding his lips. Now his hand, his tone might be all right, so I think I'm going to leave his hand alone, maybe a little bit kind of down here, but actually I prefer it as it is, so I'm not going to really do too much there. Okay, so now if we zoom in a bit and I turn skin tone off, you can just see, especially if you look over here and turn it back on again, then it just evens that out. It's subtle, but it's super simple to do so. So to try and do that in Photoshop for me would actually be quite difficult, but any of you can achieve that in Capture One. And by the way, you can download this raw file. Description in the description of the live video on Facebook, on YouTube, there's a link to download the video as well, so you can try this out. Okay, what did I want to do next? Now I feel his hand is a little bit bright because it's the brightest area of the shot. That's where your eyes tend to be drawn to, and we want to be looking here. We don't want to be looking at his hand so much, so I just want to take that down a little bit. Now I could, if we go back to our background layer, we might be able to do this just with bringing the highlights down, but you see it's affecting his forehead and his hair, so I can do that a little bit if I bring the whites down as well, but I still want to darken that slightly because I don't want this to go too flat. So I'm not going to go quite as aggressively there because I quite like the lighting here. What we're going to do is we'll make another field adjustment layer, and we call this hand darken, like so. Oops, darken. Can't spell today. Hand darken, like so. And then I'm going to experiment with a few different adjustments. So this is a field layer once more. So now it's going to affect everything. So I could bring the brightness down a bit. I'm only looking here. Don't really care what's happening to the rest of it because I just put it back on his hand. So we could bring the brightness down a bit and the highlights so it's a bit more contrasty. So if we turn this layer off, That's before and after. So we're seeing a bit more detail in his skin, which is great. So I'm going to leave it at that. Right click once more and say clear mask. So now, same technique as before, grab the brush. I'm going to make this nice and big and soft. Nice low flow so it builds up slowly. And then we can just gradually paint over here and a bit on his shoulder because that's also bright. And just kind of dull this area down a little bit as well. And I can use this same layer if I want to, just take a tiny bit off the top of his head there. So now if we turn off hand darken, you can see before and after. If we do the full before and after, and you can see how far we've got right now. So really, with the hand, I'm kind of reversing what we did with the brightness. So I could have put the brightness just on his face, but I think it's kind of a nice balance to do it this way. And don't forget, we've got our opacity slider here. So if I've overcooked it a bit with the hand and it's too dark, we can always moderate it with opacity as well. I just saw a question from Daniel. Is there a vector mask feature? Let's just put it on screen. Hang on, didn't want to go. Is there a vector mask feature if you want to be more accurate with your mask? Well, you can draw a mask in a few different ways. So we're using a brush like you can see. You can do a gradient mask, you can do a radial mask, you can use the color editor to create a mask, that's another way, and you can also use a luminosity mask, and there's also the ability to right click and refine the mask, which will help it snap around edges as well. So there's nothing like a vector Daniel per se, but there's lots of different methods to do so. And actually Tatan just popped up and said that, and Lumarange as well. So I hope I'm doing your picture justice here as well. Okay, what did I want to do next? Okay, so a couple of things to do. If we look at Tatan's wonderful edit, he's just taken the color tone out the hair a little bit, as you can see, and that's pretty, whoops, wrong spot, that's pretty easy to do. So if we go back to my edit, like so, really what we want to do is make another layer, and we just call this hair color tone. And when you edit this yourself, you can try a bunch of different ways to do it. I'm going to grab a brush, bring up the flow, and let's just drop the hardness a little bit, and then just mask this area kind of nice and soft, like so. I need to roughly get it in the right spot. I'm going to make it softer here, just so I can sort of feather off into this areas. So now that's a fairly crude mask, but a lot of the time you don't have to be super accurate to get the desired effect. So on this particular layer, what we can do is just go to the color editor. I'm going to go advanced and then grab our color picker and then just click somewhere here. So this is just going to affect a tiny bit of this color range, but it's only in that layer. The reason why I've done it on a layer is that potentially it could kind of affect the skin tone that we've already edited. So now what we can do, we can take all the saturation out. I'll probably just leave a little bit of it in so it's not fully desaturated to something like that, I would say. So if we turn this off, you can just see the difference that it's made. Okay, now back to our background layer. Looking at it, I think it's nice once you've kind of gone through all your various different layers, it's nice to go back and think, well, am I done? Do I need to do anything else? I'd probably put in a little bit more contrast and maybe brighten ever so slightly as well. If you're worried about the blacks going too dark, we can just either lift these up or crush them back down again. It's up to you. I might go for a slightly more contrasty look. Now really the last thing to do, which is not as interesting for you guys to watch, so I'm not going to do tons of it, is grab our healing brush. Let's make this tool a bit bigger. Grab our healing brush and then we can just go in to 100%, and then if we wish we can do a little bit of healing as well. Now the healing brush is simple, we just select it here, click on the spot that we want to get rid of. If we want to choose a different area, we turn this layer off. Oh, hang on a second, I just lost capture one there. Bear with me for 1 second while I bring that back up. Apologies. Only happens when it's a live broadcast, of course. So while that pops back up, let me just have a look at some of your questions. Let's see, what adjustments cannot be made in layers? That's a good question. Pretty much all of them. So the only thing that can't be made in a layer is film grain, for one. So that has to be put on the whole shot. Oh, here's Capture One back up. 1 second. Film grain. Let's bring Capture One back up on screen. And the black and white tool. And there's a couple of other sort of obscure things like vignetting, for example. But you wouldn't want to put vignetting on a layer because you've got more powerful radial masks, to be honest. Other than that, everything else kind of works on a layer. So all the various different adjustment tools, the color edits, and so on and so forth. Okay, all right, where were we? So let's go back in. Generally, of course, as I said, we get a little hiccup when we're live streaming, but we can just go ahead. There we go, it's working better now. When I'm live streaming, I'm of course pushing the graphics card, or both my graphics card, quite hard. So you can imagine the load is fairly extensive. But as I said, as this isn't very interesting for you guys to watch, then we can just pick up a few of these, you know, spots and blemishes like so. If you haven't used the new healing brush, then I strongly advise you to do so. It's very simple to use. So any little kind of small marks and so on are just really easy to fix. And it's an unlimited number of spots on this layer. So you can just happily, you know, blast away to your heart's content. Cool. Now the last thing that you might like to try, because I'm pretty much done there. Let's just make that tool a bit bigger. The last thing that you might like to try is just mess around with a little bit of color grading. Now if we make a new field adjustment layer, and we're going to call this color grade. And the reason why we put it on a separate layer is because you can experiment to your heart's content. If you're doing it on the background, then you're kind of interfering with everything else. So if we go to our color balance tool, and if you haven't used the color balance tool, again, I strongly advise you to take a look. It's really super simple to use. You essentially have the photo divided into its shadows, midtones, and highlights, and being able to push the color in any of those different areas. And there's also a master tab as well. So the master tab will really, if I just do something extreme, like if I drag this into the warmer tones, then it's just going to push that tone over the whole shot. If we go to three-way, then it divides those up into different colors. So if you just grab the shadow slider, you can see it's only affecting the shadows. So what I suggest you do with this shot is just try a few different combinations and keep it nice and subtle. So if you wanted to warm up the entire shot, then we could just push it a little bit over here. But if we wanted to kind of cancel out what we did on the shadows to bring them back to more neutral, we could just pull that back. Midtones and highlights, if you're not sure what it's affecting, you can obviously just do a dramatic kind of drag like that, and you can see the area that it's being pushed to. So midtones, kind of normally a good indication that that's around the skin, and highlights, if we just do that, you can see that's also affecting the skin and also the brighter tones as well. But I think for me, I might just kick a little bit of warmth in it on the entire shot, but then keep the shadows nice and neutral and just go in the opposite direction. And the nice thing is you can turn that layer on and off to see what you've done. You can change the opacity. You could throw in some other elements as well for color grading, like we could play around with the saturation if you wanted to mute the tones down and so on. But keeping it on a separate layer gives you lots of scope and flexibility as well. So have a try with yourself as well. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other questions. I'm just going to scroll up a little bit. Let's see. Why does the M key, just looking at Jan van der Heuvel, why does the M key not work when I'm in loom range? So when you're in the loom range tool, it's just, if you like, let's go to skin tone. When you're in the loom range tool, it's just the way the logic of Capture One is running. Now it would be nice to use the M key, but you can use display mask by turning this tick box off and here, if you hadn't spotted that. But I agree, it would be nice to use the M as well. Lawrence says, can we spend a little time explaining masks? Sometimes the effect is on the mask, other times one has to invert the mask. I think, Lawrence, to summarize, the effect is only on the shot where it's masked. So if I press M on my keyboard, or if we do Option M, you can see the grayscale mask. So the white